Everybody, and welcome to Under the Forelock. I'm your host, Betsy Billhorn, and we are talking to interesting people doing interesting things with horses. And tonight, as you can see, it's a little dark. I am very happy to have on the show Samantha Walker. Welcome, Samantha. She is an equine body worker in the Masterson Method and Craniosacral Therapy. She's a Masterson Method Certified Pracititioner and Instructor, and also a very avid horsewoman with over 40 years of experience, including racing, polo, driving, eventing, endurance, and hippotherapy. So a lot of great experience to bring to the bodywork practice. So welcome, Samantha, to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this.
Yeah. And I think everybody else is super excited about this, right? Because bodywork is a big thing with horses these days.
It is.
Yeah. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you ended up, I mean, there's a lot of different equine bodywork modalities, right, that we can choose from. How did you end up getting into Masterson Method and then also the Craniosacral Therapy?
Yeah, sure. So there's several versions of this story that I tell depending on the audience. But I'll kind of take the middle road here. So obviously we know body work is a thing. I honestly never really thought about it for horses until a friend of mine had a horse who was having some issues, and she'd tried many things, and had consulted some of us about, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? And the upshot of that was she got online the night after that conversation and found Masterson Method. And this was in 2011, I think, 2012, and emailed it to the website to a couple of us and said, have you ever heard of this? And we're like, no. And we all got the book, we got the video, we just started working on horses. I mean, not professionally, but, like experimenting with the modality. And all three of us are now certified practitioners. And I've gone on to be an instructor with Masterson Method. I think the main aspect that really attracted us was that it's very accessible. Anybody can do it. If you want to do it, you can do it. You can't hurt the horse. You can't do it wrong. I like to say you can be more proficient and efficient at it. But the basis of it is you're listening to the horse. And, if you're a lifelong horse person, you know what that means. Like you get these messages from your horse. You may consciously get them or unconsciously get them, but when let's say you have that great day riding and you're just like, wow, everything clicked and he was listening to me, and oh, everything was wonderful. So like you're in sync there, whether you know it or not, right? And then some days you're not, right? So right. The whole basis of Masterson is seeking out that place and being there all the time, and then applying it with the bodywork techniques. So it's a little different from other modalities. It's not better or worse. I think they're all effective, but I personally, to answer your question, I was really attracted to the fact that, when Jim Masterson says you're working with the horse and not on the horse, it differs in that you are listening to the horse. The learned skill is learning those small cues, to listen to those small cues from the horse and then responding back in kind. The other end of that spectrum is something like chiropractic or acupuncture, where you learn a set group, you learn a body of information and you apply it to the horse in front of you. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much the same, right? You may have a diagnostic or evaluation procedure, but you do this if this is what you find in the horse, and you do it to the horse.
Right. Right.
Again, nothing wrong with that. It's just what I found attractive with Masterson is that you're choosing the techniques based on what the horse is telling you his body needs. Mm-hmm. Craniosacral, it's a little shorter story with that. I'd had craniosacral done on me, craniosacral osteopathy, back in, it's like 20 years ago now almost. I had just like intense pain, like sciatica. I didn't have a reflex below my left knee. And I tried, traditional physical therapy, drugs, all sorts of stuff. And like nothing was making it go away. Acupuncture helped. But when I went to have the craniosacral therapy, oh my gosh, it just, like I said, this was 20 years ago. And I saw the practitioner for about a year and I haven't had to go back. It fixed
Wow.
it. And I remembered that experience once I started doing the body work with the horses. It was always in the back of my head was, can I add that to my repertoire, because it makes you feel amazing. And I wanted the horses to feel that.
Yeah. So
So,
how did you, I mean, was that a thing? I mean, how did you find training and doing it? I mean, it's fairly popular and it's getting mainstream with people, but from a equine perspective, how did you find that training?
so that's a good question, because as of now, there really isn't a course of study that you can take. I am learning it through the Upledger Institute, which is very well established internationally for a number of human modalities of body work. And they started, I should have looked this up before but relatively recently, where
Hmm.
there's Dr. Sandy Howlett has taught with them, and she's a chiropractor, human and equine. She lives in Canada, so she teaches the equine component of the Upledger craniosacral program, and also small animal, so mainly canine.
Okay.
It's a relatively new program, and they are putting a certification pathway in place. There's a framework for it now. I don't think anyone's been officially certified, but there are 4 different modules that you can take, each 4 days long, and then there's a case study protocol and a written and practical exam at the end of it. Is the plan for that. But yeah, so there are equine professionals and some body workers who teach components of craniosacral. The Flugen Institute for Osteopathy teaches some components of craniosacral, but they don't just really get into the craniosacral aspects and everything you can do. So it
Mhm.
seemed like the best program currently available. And it's been proctored by a well-known institution. So that's why I chose it. And Sandy's amazing. She's an amazing practitioner. And I mean, it's just, I don't know. I've had her work on me too. And you're just like, oh my gosh, if I'm making the horses feel half as good,
Then yeah,
like I
you're
want more.
getting there. Yeah.
I mean, anybody who's had body work, like acupuncture or massage, and like you get off the table and you're just like, maybe I should have had someone here to drive me home. Like you're on another planet.
Yeah.
So if you've had body work on yourself, like what I'm talking about. And those of us who love horses so dearly, to be able to bring that to them. I mean, it's such a gift. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but like every single time I see a horse release tension under my hands, I'm like, I feel like a kid in the candy store. And I've been doing this for 8 years. I mean, I just have
Wow.
this big smile on my
and
face.
every horse is different too, right? So you're always having that variety, with the different things that you're presented with and the different personalities.
Yep. Every horse is different. Yep. I had a horse literally fall asleep on me last week. It happens once in a while. It's not super uncommon for them to want to lay down
Hmm.
during the session. But he actually fell asleep,
Oh.
and was snoring, and I continued to work on him. I mean, he was laying down. I continued to work on him because I asked him, right? Like, I mean, this is part of the thing, and it sounds corny, and you're like, what do you mean you asked him? But I could feel changes still under my hands, and what he was doing in his sleep was concurrent with what I was feeling. Like something would shift, a muscle or an energy would shift under my hands, and I would see it in his face. He was like whinnying in his sleep as I
Oh,
worked on him.
wow. Wow.
So I mean, you see these things, and I have a science background. It's like, you're trying to explain this to people, and you feel like at a loss for words, because we really don't know how this works. I mean, we can guess.
Mm-hmm.
You're shifting things, you're releasing things. You can compare it to human modalities, where how your body feels when you get off the practitioner's table, or just how you feel like when somebody hugs you, especially if maybe it's you're not expecting it, and someone comes up and gives you a big hug, and then your whole body just relaxes and you didn't realize you were tense. So
Right.
we have all these ways to compare it, to try to compare it to everyday experiences. But I see the changes in the horses every single time I work on them. So my science brain is like, well, I'm not quite sure what's happening. Like, I have all this education and I'm applying all this stuff, and I'm working with the horse, and I have this like mind meld, and I'm feeling the energy and the tension release, and the muscles change, and the horse is yawning and doing other external things that indicate tension release. And the owner reports that, he's able to change his leads better. And, so they're things that you can tangibly point to. But there's so much of it that's like, well, what is happening? We really don't know that component yet. And anyway, so there's a point after which, when you're talking about this, you really are at a loss for words. And with my students, when I'm teaching this, sometimes I'll say, hey, can I put my hands on you? Because sometimes just having them feel, like what I'm doing with the energy and with like really, really subtle pressure, they're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
soft and it's so light. Anyway, I can tell I'm super excited about this.
Oh,
I go off on
no.
tangents, so please draw me back in.
Oh, no. And I think this is great,
I
right? Yeah.
it's
Yeah, no, it's really great. So I have kind of an
um
interesting question. Oh, so I have an interesting question for you, because I have had craniosacral therapy and I totally know what you're talking about, right? You just feel fantastic. But when I had it, you're laying and you're quiet while they're doing it. So how does that work on a horse exactly, right? Because you and I can have a conversation and you're like, okay, I'm going to be here and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm ready for it. Where a
yep.
horse has no idea what's happening, right? And they're not going to, you just can't go stand still, right? Because that just
Yep.
doesn't happen. So how do you do that with a horse? Like, how does that work?
So some of it, so this is a really interesting question, because most of us who've been doing this for a while, we build a nest for the horse's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so both the modalities I do are like I referred to, with the horse. So we do things prior to the session to gauge, where the horse is as far as being receptive to body work. Some of those things include grounding yourself,
Mm-hmm.
making sure you're calm. I mean, and that's just horsemanship 101, right? Like, you have a bad day at work or something, or school, and you go into the barn and like everything goes wrong. And it's like, well, the horse is reading you, right? We know that
Right.
horses are super intuitive, sensitive beings. That's why we love them. And, but they're also prey animals. So if you go in like, they're going to be like, where's the tiger? Oh my gosh, I don't see him, but you clearly see him. Oh my gosh. So it starts, when you first walk into the barn,
Yeah.
and how you may talk to the owner for a while. And, I'm already working on the horse. Like, I'm talking to you about your horse, and I'm just like, hey, horse, how are you? I'm having this kind of conversation that usually the horse will start to yawn or relax or kind of go into his stall and, drop a hip and kind of, so that's the very first step, is just, the broader picture. Does the horse seem ready to be approached?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, a lot of times we're coming in, we have an hour to ride, and we go in, and we're not rude to our horse, but we tack him up and we go ride, right? We
Right.
just do
Right.
something to him, or we groom him, and we stop at the barn and groom him and put his blanket on, or like it's stuff that, we do on our time. And if I'm going to do a session on a horse, this is the horse's time, right? So
Right.
that's the first part of it. As far as going into the stall and actually doing techniques, usually if you've been doing this for a while, you get drawn to a certain part of the body, and it generally doesn't have anything to do with what the owner has told you about problems or performance issues or anything. You just get a feeling. Again, if you get on the horse's wavelength, they are talking to us all the time, and I'll just say, is this what you want? And I'll go to a certain part of the body and start a technique.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like magnetism. Like if it's a yes, like your hands, you can't take them off the horse. I mean, they sink further into his body, and then you're just on this journey. It's very rare when I have a horse who says no to everything. There's almost always some thread you can pull, and once you have that thread, you just hop from one part of the body to another. There is an anatomy component to it. Certainly, if you know your anatomy, it can help you with these modalities, for sure. You can be more effective in visualizing where your hands are and what might be going on underneath them. Following fascial and muscle trains to affect, something in the pole perhaps that the horse won't let you work on his head, but you can work on his hind end, and there are direct fascial and muscle connections there. So you can still work on the pole and you're at the other end of the horse, and the owner's like, what are you doing? He has problems with his pole, not his tail. It's like, so they rarely say that, but sometimes you can hear them thinking it. But yeah, it's rare when you can't find some thread to pull. I mean, generally the horse is not jumping around, and if he is, we look at things like therapeutic space. That's what I call therapeutic space, which is he missing his buddy? Is this a horse who normally lives outside and you've brought him into the stall to do the work? Well, let's go work outside. Again, like, I don't have to be in a stall. This is about the horse. If he's going to be calmer out in the field, we'll go work in the field, and vice versa. Is it food time? I mean, generally, there's something contributing to the inability to receive the work. So again, I hope that answers the question. But it's rare. It's rare when you have a horse who won't engage with you, and they don't have to be 100% still either. I mean, sometimes for some of them to release tension, they need to walk. Like, they'll take a turn around the stall. I had this neat video from a few years ago of a horse who he's one of those ones that was really interactive. So I would do a technique. He had to kind of walk his stall, walk away from me. He'd go in the opposite corner and yawn and yawn and yawn and shake it off, and then come right back up to me and be like, okay, I'm ready for more. That was his pattern, like, the whole session. So that's part of it too, is learning their language. There's some rescue horses I work on where some of this is, the answer would be a little different, where you're really working at them from a distance, and it really does look like voodoo then, because you're quite a distance away from them. These horses who've been traumatized or isolated from people and other animals, so it's not even necessarily a training issue, although it can be that too, but it's more like, I don't know what you are, I'm freaking out that you're even in my space. So yeah, I mean, so the broader answer to your question is it's part of that conversation with the horse, and they are all different. And that's part of the great thing I love about these modalities is it's like Christmas every day when you're working on these horses, because they're not all the same. You're not going and doing the same thing to every single horse. It's very, very different every single time, even with the same horse. Because if you've gone and released tension, and he's gone off and done his job for 2 months, and you're coming back and checking in, he's going to have different tension patterns. He's going to have different sources of stress. Maybe different tack has been introduced, or his performance, his training regimen has been increased. So he's using muscles that he hadn't before. So his method of communication may be the same, but the conversation I have with his body is going to be very different every single time. So
interesting. Yeah, and it's just like people, right? You know, if you're getting massage therapy or whatever, right? It's not the same feeling every time. You know, you have like different ouchy spots or whatever with that. Yeah. So kind of, you know, it's interesting, you know, because I had asked about that. You know, my mare she's, you know, exactly what you said. Like she doesn't want to be touched on her hind at all. I've had 4 chiropractors kindly, we agree mutually that maybe I'm going to be fired as a client because the first time she's going to try and kill him. But, you know, and I'm wondering now if it's like, because something is done at her, right. You know, and so I guess the question within the statement is, you know, do you find, you know, you have this intuitive nature with a horse and they're constantly talking to you, that there can be sometimes some more emotional type of reaction, right? So it's I don't want you, like you said with a rescue horse, I don't want you touching me, period, right? So maybe they're picking up a vibe from that person, or they had chiropractic in the past, and you know, that was my bad because she has had chiropractic in the past, but I wasn't there, and so I don't know what happened, right? You know, so I mean, do you think that there's a little bit of that aspect when you're kind of dealing with I don't want to say reactive, but maybe a skeptical horse, right?
So yes. I personally, so this is my current, you know, thought on this, and it could change as I learn more.
Sure.
Um, but so yeah, I mean, horses definitely have, you know, like memories, like if they've had a bad experience, for sure. My experience is that it would really have to, um, be repeated and very traumatic for them, because they don't think like we do. Like they
Hmm.
don't remember things. It's more of a conditioning, right? So if they've had a bad experience with, you know, tall people with hats, and they see a tall person with a hat, it's like, because they've been trained that when they see that, bad things happen.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's less of a conscious thought of, oh, that's bad, than this reaction that they have as a prey animal, that
Hmm.
in the past, right, this has brought bad things, but it's not a conscious, like we've stayed it out, right, like as a conscious thought. So for them it's not, it's just a reaction. um so it's interesting because, and again, I can speculate as to why this happens, but the the number of times that I've experienced it's undeniable, uh, that oftentimes if there's some sort of, training or behavior issue going on, it's almost always related to pain,
Hmm.
especially if you're talking about, um, you know, I'm assuming your horse is trained and has a job, and
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
functions and can get tacked up, and you know, so
Yeah.
these horses that we know have this background, this set of, you know, and then all of a sudden, I'm not using your horse here, but
Sure. Yeah.
there's change, right? Like there's a change,
Hmm.
and they used to be able to do this or respond this way, and now they don't. um, there's usually some discomfort there,
Yeah.
and if you've got a horse who is repeatedly saying, you know, do not touch me there, there very well could be a discomfort issue. It could be absolutely could be an emotional thing,
Hmm.
and it also very well could be, the energy of the person who is approaching the horse,
Hmm.
and or it could be all of those. It's very very true. Like even for me, who like this, I do this for a living. I I center myself. I try to, you know, be calm, and I you know, have these things that I do even as I'm approaching the barn, um, to try to just leave all my baggage at the door. But it's a learned routine, and we all of us who do this effectively have some sort of learned routine. And again, not to knock any other modality, but it's really not about the modality. It's about the intent that you have when you walk into the barn. And if you're, I have 8 horses to do today, and you know, you have to stand here and let me do this to
Hmm.
you, and because it's going to help you, and it may very well help, but the horse feels that oh my gosh, I'm late for my next appointment, and that owner is like gonna really yell at me, and like, oh my gosh, now I'm gonna be late for my dinner, and my wife's gonna be mad at me. So they feel all of that, and they feel all of that. I can't think of a good metaphor. Maybe like if you have a fever and how sensitive you feel to everything,
Right.
the light and the touch, and it's like, do not touch me. It's like they're like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the programs I'm studying in right now is Sharon Wilsey's Horse Speak, and we could have another whole hour talking about that. But one of the things that her partner said to me on the phone, I just want to bring this up because it's so prescient with this virus. She was explaining going to the grocery store the other day, and she said, we talk about horses as prey animals and how they are constantly checking their environment, and they prioritize safety and then comfort, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there are a lot of things that can come down from that, and a lot of behaviors, but that's really their world is safety and comfort. And she said, we talk about this in theory, and we read these books, and we like to think that whatever level we're on with our personal journey, we understand the horse in that aspect. But she said, I really don't think I understood it until I went grocery shopping in the time of COVID-19, because I really understood what it was like to be a horse. And I'm like looking around, don't touch me, don't come near me.
Yes.
You are a danger to me,
Yeah.
and regardless of what people personally think about it, I mean, it's, she lives with someone who's greatly immune compromised. She was really, the people who choose to walk around without masks is like, and she said it really brought how the horse feels all the time, like right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like, yeah, you're right. Like, I went to Tractor Supply the other day, and that's exactly how I felt. Like, I wanted to like mare squeal and kick people, because I was like, please don't. Like, I can't, but generally we don't have that level of awareness of our surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we generally don't have that that feeling like that's something that we can't tangibly touch can get us. And so you're talking about somebody coming into the stall, and it could be us, like as the owners, right? Coming
Right.
in, and the horse isn't doing what he's supposed to,
Yeah.
well, it could be us. It could be us. And it certainly could be something internal to the horse. Um, uh, you and we're talking about pain here, and I do need to say that this body work does not exist in a vacuum, like at all. It's for it to be effective, I mean really effective, you need to be working with a variety of other people that are on the horse's care team. The farrier and the dentist and the vet, other body workers, the saddle fitter. It all fits together, and I can, as a body worker, go in there and make your horse feel great. But if there's a source of ongoing tension, that is not going to be fixed until whatever that aspect, let's say the saddle doesn't fit, so I can go in and be like, okay, horsey, here you go, your tension's gone, and the horse is like, yay, and the owner's like, yay, he goes great, and then a month later he's not going great again. So
Right.
there's that aspect of it too, where you're talking about a horse that like will not let you near part of his body, and if it's a different issue, I don't even know if I can tell you a circumstance where it hasn't been something that you could relate to the horse's environment or his body.
Right. And it's kind of just maybe unlocking that key on what that was or is, or, and figuring out the source of that, right? Because it's like you said, you could make them feel better, but if they're not having their teeth done, or maybe there's something wrong with feet, or you've released all the tension, that's great, but then you put the saddle on, and it's like, putting on a wrong fitting shoe, right? And we're right back to, a month later. So
Or it can be us. It can be us.
right.
So There was a mid-level dressage horse I worked on several years ago. And I love to tell this story because I didn't know the owner. She kind of tagged on to my visit, which happens quite a bit. Like, hey, do you have time to do one more? So I didn't know her. I had a very brief conversation with her. No performance or behavior complaints. She just thought it was interesting and wanted me to work on her horse. So the only area of tension I found was down the right side of his barrel, like pretty much where your leg would be. So I told her, I was like, hey, this is what I found. There's some tension here mid body. If you like, I can show you a couple techniques that would help him with that. And just out of my mouth, like, I did not even think to say this. I said, do you have anything going on with your right leg?
Wow.
And he just looks at me and starts crying. I mean, just like bawling. And I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Whoops.
I didn't even hear myself say it until it was out of my mouth. It was just, but she'd had some huge accident and shattered like her leg. And so, we affect our horses, and you see that tension that the rider, whoever the regular rider is, you will give your attention to your horse over time. And if your right leg is a little bit tighter, a little bit tense, and your whole right side is a little bit tense, your horse is going to be tense on the right. And is that something that's going to change for her? Well, no. Like, she's getting body work, she's aware of it, her trainer's working with her, but there's always going to be that little bit of tension that goes down into the horse. And it's fine. We all do it. The thing is to be aware of it and to either, get a regular body worker in there or learn a little bit yourself. Because if you just go in and say, okay, after I ride, every time I'm going to spend 10 minutes, working on that part of the horse, you're dusting it off. It's just like your regular horse maintenance duties. The thing that becomes the issue with the horse is, over time, what will happen is that will compensate in other places in the body. That horse's part of the body will be like, hey, I can't do this job, so somebody else needs to do it. So you'll have another part of the horse's body that's not well suited for that job doing that job. And then over time, you will get that part of the body will be sick of doing somebody else's job. So you generally, with a horse who's got a job, like let's say a lesson horse who gets ridden by multiple people and has, I don't want to say a hard life, but like a hard life in that you have different tack on you and different, kids who are bouncing around, and you don't have one primary rider, and you've got all these different sources of tension on your body. This is what you can see as a body worker is all these ping-ponging sources of tension that accumulate over time. So something like this woman with her leg, that's kind of like I don't want to say best case scenario. I'm not saying it's good that she had her accident, but like it was easily identified as a tension source.
Right.
And it's something that can be affected quite easily. We don't diagnose as body workers, or I shouldn't speak for all body workers, but that's something for the vets. And there are a number of times where I've found something in the horse where there's like a pretty hard no, like either don't work there, or there's a tension area of tension that just doesn't respond to work. And that's pretty clearly like, okay, there's something going on here. You need to get imaging done, talk to your vet about this. But something like this with the leg, it's, it clears up when you do it. Okay, I'm pretty sure that, that's what it is, right? There's tension associated with the rider. I can't remember how I got off on this tangent, but
it's fine, because it kind of, as you're talking though, it leads me to, so, I mean, yeah, it's funny because my significant other, when he had a hip replacement, and I was smiling as you're telling the story because he had a hip replacement, and he's riding his horse, and he's like, the horse won't move to the right. And I'm like, well, move, and you can't really move to the right, right? Your hip is all like,
Yeah.
right? And so the horse would just, Jack would just keep going this way. But I think, is there also a feedback loop the other way? Because sometimes I, either in riding my own horse or riding other horses, all of a sudden, sometimes things are like, oh, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't think that I felt tightness in my back before, or, why is my calf hurting or something, I mean, so do you think that there's a feedback loop sometimes that we're picking up in our own body somatically, kind of what's going on with the horse as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the case. And the riders who are sensitive enough to pick that up, every time I get off my horse, like my lower left back is tight.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, absolutely. I would pay attention to that. And then if you have a body worker come in, it would be interesting to see, if there's a congruence there, if you find that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a student, a bodywork student, a few years ago who she was so hyper aware. She'd be working on a horse in a stall, and there'd be another horse in an adjoining stall, or walking down the aisle, and she would feel something in her body. And
Wow.
it was really confusing for her because she was assuming that it was the horse she was working on. And over
Mm-hmm.
time, she realized that it wasn't. It was all these other horses who were basically like, hey, work on me next, and like sending her information through her body. So in a case like that, where you have someone who's so into, you don't even have to be on the horse to feel that.
Wow.
So it's
Wow.
definitely a thing. And again, you hear these words, and it's just like, okay, that's crazy stuff. And like, and again, I have a science base, and I see this, like, that's my schooling is in biology and chemistry and genetics. And um this, you would think that some of the things I'm saying would like fly right in the face of science. But for me, it's like every time I work on a horse, it reinforces it, because here's an experiment. Let's see what happens when I do this. Or I think the horse is telling me this, so let me respond in this way. And he's like, oh yes. And like, it proves it. Like, there's these little tiny ongoing scientific experiments every single time. And again, I can guess about how this works, but I don't know. So um, I've been taking Jillian Kreinbring's biomechanics classes, which I highly recommend for anybody. She's going to be in New Hampshire, I think, in August, unless things get canceled. But uh, she kindly admonished a fellow student of mine in February, who had used the term woo-woo to describe something. And Jillian, anyone who knows Jillian, you can tell her, you can imagine her tone of voice, but she was very kind, and she just said, I don't like to use the word woo-woo because I'm gonna mess this up now. I'm trying to be Jillian and I can't remember the quote. She says, I don't like to use the term woo-woo because it removes the responsibility for what's happening. Like, you're not taking responsibility for the fact that this is actually happening. And when you use that term sort of in this quasi-apologetic way, it really takes away from the fact that this does happen. And just because like some people don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And it's still a thing. I mean, for all of us, there are things that are beyond our sensory perception or our knowledge perception. Like, you have a whole field of expertise, which I know nothing about. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, technology doesn't exist. IA doesn't exist. I mean, that would be patently ridiculous, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same thing, right? So, it's not woo-woo. It's just something that we don't know.
Yeah.
And you can't deny the effects of it. So it's cool stuff. The other example I like to use with my students when they're like, well, what's happening? Like, I want to know how this works. And is it energy work? And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. But you're also using touch and intuition in both of the modalities that I use. And I firmly believe that in our lifetimes that you will be able to image tension. So that's kind of the missing piece right now, is you say, oh, well, I release tension in your horse. And the owner's like, yeah, cool. I don't know what that means, but cool. Like, he can move better now. But there's no, there's no like scientific like graph or chart or machine you can hook up to the horse. Although Linda Tellington Jones did some stuff with EKG that was really interesting, and got a lot more of attention into her modality. I think she did it, I don't know, in the 80s maybe. I mean, she's been around since the 70s, I think, doing the T-touch and stuff. So like, there are ways you can do that, but that's the horse's reaction. That's the electrical reaction to what you're doing. But actually the tension in the muscles, like, there's no way that I know of right now that you can say, okay, we're going to test the horse with this machine and say, here's where the tension is, and then do your session, and then see that it's gone. Like, we're trusting that what you're doing is working, and then we see it in the horse's changed performance and behavior. So like, that's not really deniable, but we don't really know what's going on yet. And to that I say, well, we've only had like CAT scans and MRI since the early 70s, I think. I want to say like 70, 71 or something. And then x-rays have only been around for about 100 years. So again, it's like, back in the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, back in 300 BC or whatever, like, they clearly knew that we had bones in our body, right? Like, but you had to break somebody to see it,
to see them. Yeah.
autopsy, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of question and skepticism about various parts of the human body. And then at some point you can image it, right? And like, oh wow, like, there's your bone, and like, there's your broken bone, and like, I don't need to open you up to see that. And wow, how cool is that? But we never denied that broken bones were a thing. So it's like, I see that same thing with tension in muscles, where you've got, obviously you have tension. I mean, like, we're a body, we know we have tension, and horses do too. Like, again, it's not deniable, but to see the effect of what you're doing manually on the horse, we just don't have that technology yet. So again, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just that it's not something that we can quantify in that particular way yet. So we rely on people who can see that, who do know that. And obviously I'm very passionate about it. Once I kind of put all this together as a lifelong horse person and a lifelong intuitive who really hadn't found a home yet, it was just everything kind of came together. And again, like I said at the beginning, what a gift to be able to return this feeling to the horses. And it really changes your experience with them. It increases the trust level and your ability to, once they see that you are listening to them, and by that it's like, okay, is it this, is it this, is it this, is it this, and you're reading their yeses and their nos. They trust you more and more with more information. And if you're open to that, it's amazing. Like, if you work on a horse that you also ride, or that you train or you work with, and to see that relationship ripple out, based on the trust that you've built with the body work.
So now
I went off on
oh no, but again, these are all like these, I mean, they're fascinating. So I'm not, like, but so you were saying something really interesting there though, about, when you're doing I mean, I think there's 2 points that I'd like to cover, but the first one being is, you had said very early on in the conversation that one of the things that appealed to you about Masterson was that, anybody could do it. Right. And, and then you made another remark just now about, for the person to be doing body work with the horse that they ride, that just really increases the texture and the depth of that relationship between you and your horse. So when you're with your clients, is that something that you give them, a little bit of Masterson method to do, while is that something that you can do, or how would somebody go about doing that to, if they were interested in doing that kind of body work on their horse, on the one that they ride on? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I do in the context of my sessions, and there's a little asterisk here because it depends on the horse's journey. It's almost always there is at least one technique that I can safely teach the owner and say, hey, if here are 2 or 3 techniques that based on the current tension pattern would really help your horse continue to release tension. So I do offer that in the context of my regular session. I'd say maybe half the people take me up on it, and maybe half of them go ahead and do it on their horse. And I can really tell, like, in the owner will be like, I really didn't do much. It was just like 5 minutes a couple times a week. But you can really tell. I mean, this work, it snowballs. It accumulates. It doesn't dissipate and go off into the ether. So if you're doing just even a little bit, it helps your horse. And occasionally there's a horse who either for safety reasons or the horse has a relatively complicated journey, like there may not be something that I can effectively teach the person in the time we have. But that's rare. There's usually almost always something. The thing about Masterson method is like I said at the beginning, you can't mess it up. You can't hurt the horse. You're not using a tool. There are no manipulations. There are no stretches. You're not doing nothing's hard. You're not doing any kind of hard massage. So again, it's nice to know where the muscles are because it does make you more effective and efficient. But you're not identifying a muscle and having to push on it like a masseuse would. But yeah, it is very accessible. And it's one of the reasons that I do continue to teach it, and I use it in my practice. Most of us who've been doing this for a while have other modalities that we bring into our personal style. And so there are definitely things that for me, the way I wield the techniques in the different modalities that I do, for a certain horse, there may be one that jumps into my head, and it might not be Masterson. It could be something else. But it's very accessible. There are courses obviously that you can take, with the Masterson program. I teach them. There are many other people across the country and world who teach them. You can do it to get certified, or you can just do it. You don't have to seek certification. And I also do a little bit of teaching on, myself. Like if you just if you wanted to hire me, hey, teach me some things. I don't care if it's Masterson or Cranio or, acupressure, just what do you do with a horse that might be interesting, and come teach me for an hour on my horse. I do offer that as well. As a separate thing from I'm going to work on your horse and then show you a couple things.
Right. So just more like a holistic, wellness kind of lesson program, for that hour or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. So I do offer that. I do demonstrations where there are a number of different components of that. There's one where I just work on a horse and answer questions about it. And there are various hands-on programs where maybe, 4 or 6 people will get together. I work on a horse, and then we have other horses there that everybody practices on in a group setting. I also do anatomy demonstrations. I have 2 skeletons, real skeletons, that I can bring and just, do a couple basic, here's where your horse's bridle sits, and, things like that. So,
yeah. That's really cool. And then the other point that I wanted to hit, because, we kind of went into that, is it woo woo or not woo woo, right? And the scientific proof. And I'd be curious your opinion on this, because what I have noticed is that, right, I think especially in the last like 5 years, 5 to 7 years, that all these different modalities for people have become very mainstream, right? And and I would say 7 years ago, if I said I was going to have acupuncture on my horse, people were kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
And now, and which by the way is so crazy, because my horse, you could put needles anywhere and she's just like, oh, she thinks that's the best thing ever. But I think, I'm wondering too, because so many people they've experienced the benefit for themselves. And, now, if somebody says, oh, well, I'm going to have the equine body worker come in, like at least in my experience, and maybe it's just me and the barns that I'm at, but nobody bats an eye at that. You know what I mean? Like, it's more like, well, can I sign on, or do they have an extra appointment? So this like proof, I think, the scientific bit would be interesting, but then on the other hand, I'm kind of wondering if it's really necessary, just given, do you see more of a mainstream, because you've been doing this now for 8 years. Do you feel it's been more of a mainstream practice? And then, how has that affected your business? I mean, where maybe 8 years ago you had to kind of go begging around for clients or convincing them of the value versus, today, have you seen any difference?
So part of this is that you really can't convince them. So I know you were just saying that as a to make a point, but there are people who have no interest. They think it's crazy. They don't see a need for it. Their barns are successful. Maybe, they're, I have one client who the entire barn is the discipline they do. They excel at it. If I said the name, you probably know who it is. And they win everything. There's one horse in that barn that's a client of mine. And she sees value in the body work, but nobody else does. And they'll walk by the stall and just be like, oh, and you're not gonna, you're not gonna talk people into this. Like if they really don't see it and they're being successful at their discipline,
right,
they're not going to change anything, right? Like even if it makes something better, there's a chance that it can make something better. There's no mindset there that you can even have a conversation with, because there's nothing just emotionally and philosophically it's not something that they're interested in, and they don't see that there's a problem with their horses. So you go in and you do your work and you let it speak for itself, and people who see the changes and appreciate it will hire you. And I find that probably, I would say 25%, roughly 25% of my clientele, they know it's awesome. They know it's going to help their horse. They're on a mission to make their horse as awesome as possible. They're not afraid that the bodywork's going to turn something up that then they have to deal with. Like, hey, you really maybe should try to get a natural balance dentist in here and get your horse's teeth balanced. Well, what's balancing? I've never heard of that. I thought you just went in and took off the sharp edges. And so then we talk about the TMJ, and like they're really interested in it, and then they want to see my skeleton and all this stuff. So like 25% are just like, yeah, like knowledge. And I'd say 25% are what I would call seekers. Maybe like they're at the end of the line and they don't know what else to try, or this sounds crazy, but there's some sort of, I don't really know, but I'm just going to try it. Or the person in the stall next to me tried it, so I'm going to try it on my horse, and it may or may not do anything, but like I have no emotional stake in this at all. I'm seeking.
right.
And I'm sure, as horse people, they always say there's one in every barn where, there's a horse there who never gets well, right? There's always something, and there's another gadget, and you're jumping from trainer to trainer, or, so there's a seeking, component there. And I'd say like 50% of my clientele, they they see an effect and they appreciate it. They may or may not like get it, on the like the woo woo. Sorry, Jillian. Spectrum. Like they may embrace that aspect of it more or less, but they do see a change in their horse, so they keep at it, and they may even have more than one body worker. Most of the horses, I would say, in that category have more than one modality that is done on them. Somebody said, and I heard it from Sandy Howlett, Dr. Howlett, my craniosacral instructor, but I don't know that it's her quote. But she said, she told us in one of the classes that bones are the slaves to the soft tissue. And I'm like, yeah, like that makes sense. Like, we're kind of taught that, the skeleton is the thing, and then, all this other stuff is hanging on it, and like the skeleton is the thing. But we're, my little tangent here talking about different modalities, where, you have a chiropractor come in and kind of like, but I've seen horses lose chiropractic in 24 hours because the reason it's out is soft tissue, right? Like pulling that. So, the connection here was with having multiple body workers, where you could have someone come in and do a soft tissue modality. Doesn't have to be mine, soft tissue modality, something to loosen that soft tissue, then have the chiropractor come to kind of give it a little, shortcut.
Yeah, a little more oomph, right? Yeah.
But back to your question about people and finding a kind of a way in. Like part of it's my personality that I don't go out and rah sell it. And part of it is just like the nature of horse people, where you're going to be attracted to this or you're not. And we're going to both be wasting our time if I am trying to convince you of something that
Right.
So,
right.
And as far as business, it's really interesting because I began this journey actually on the West Coast, where people live and breathe alternative medicine. And everything you said is true. Like, when you and I were growing up, even like for human chiropractic or acupuncture, I mean, for humans, people were like, yeah, I'm gonna step sideways away from you. And like now it's just like, oh, okay. And like you may still, whatever people personally feel about that is fine, but certainly you're correct. Like for animals, there's still a journey there where it's like, okay, this is a body and it's got the same stuff that we do. It's got tension working upon it and injuries and things that you hide and things that you don't really know, like, hey, like this hurts, but it's not actually my shoulder, it's compensating for my lower back. And all these things that we can go to the doctor and say like, hey, my right shoulder, my left shoulder hurts. But tracing it back to, okay, the compensatory tension here, right? Because it's actually your lower right lumbar that is tight. We do the same thing with our horses, right? Like we treat the blinky red light, which in the context of like traumatic injury or disease or something may be the correct light. But even my point is, even us, like we don't always connect what hurts in our body to the actual source of the pain, right?
Right.
So you're talking about an animal who can't literally speak to us and say, well, how do you know what really hurts? Well, with the body work, you can follow it back. I mean, along their body, you can follow the tension back and say, over a few sessions, this is the part of the body that's not responding to work. So let's look at this. Like, let's look at the right hock, not the front left.
Right.
Because yeah, like you blew the suspensory a couple times, but you know what? If your hock isn't closing properly with every single step on that opposite diagonal, you're going to have short stride a little bit heavier weight, a little bit more of like a kind of a stilted gait up there. And over time, that's what's going to have your problem, right? And no one looks at the hind end. So it's the same thing with the human. So yes, the human conversation with that is certainly further down the line, but you are seeing now most states have certifications in some, certainly chiropractic for animals. A lot of them have certifications for massage and acupuncture now too. But it varies wildly from state to state. But the general ethos on the West Coast is, like, oh, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm like, oh, I'm an equine body worker. And, oh, what modality? Oh, wow, that's really cool. And, there's like questions about it. And moving back to the East Coast 3 years ago, very different. Certainly New England, right? Like stoic New England. It's just, oh, what do you do? My significant other would, speak, and then, I'm a body worker, oh, and they assume human usually. I'm like, oh no, I work on horses. Oh, it's like, look at that bird,
It's just like there's like awkward.
So it's really interesting because there is very definitely a strong alternative medicine undercurrent in New England.
Yes, there
very
is.
definitely. And once you kind of find it, you're like, okay, my people. But just the exterior presentation is very different. And so you talk about, clientele or building a business, or, how people are interested in alternative medicine. Certainly where you are in the country and where you are in the world really makes a difference with that. It's interesting, again, like if it's not everybody's cup of tea, that's fine. But I'm just remarking on the differences. It's really interesting. And you've got, so I would say certainly the West Coast is where you're going to see that more of like a household conversation. And of course, like my dog gets acupuncture, and my horse gets,
no, that's totally, because I lived on the West Coast like you did, right? So and I think we actually lived in the same city. Because you lived in Portland, Oregon. I did. So
quite a while.
Yeah, so did I. So I definitely know what you're talking about with the some of the cultural differences between the two coasts, and especially New Hampshire and say Oregon and Washington, right? No, that's certainly true. But it sounds though, from a business perspective, that you were able to grow a practice out here. It's just finding the right, like you said, it's finding your tribe. And it's kind of a little more underground, but there's definitely, because and I was going to laugh and say, well, maybe it's just the bar. I clearly found that underground because the barns I'm at, oh, hey, so-and-so's going to come in here and they do this, do you want, and everybody's talking about it. Right. Yeah.
Well, that's very true too, because it does tend to be kind of barn centric, which, I mean, I guess that's typical, right? It could be like a discipline thing, or the mentality of whoever is running the barn, and then the type of boarders they attract. But it does seem to be like that situation I mentioned in Massachusetts, where there was like one person in that whole barn of 35 horses. That's unusual. They're usually a couple people, or like you said, like the barn will call in like a body worker, be like, hey, this is the day that so and so is going to be here, so sign up. Or you at least have a couple different clients. But I have quite a few. It's interesting. Like so we're talking about parts of the country, and certainly there are large barns here, but there are also so many backyard horses. Like I would say most of my clients they're at home. And I think that's largely because people don't want to maintain a large facility in the winter here. When we moved here 3 years ago, and even now, I can't tell you how many large barns are on the real estate market. Like people just don't, they don't want to do it. So that's interesting too, where you've got, a barn with a certain way of doing things that may or may not predispose them to body work. But then you've got all these separate individual people who do get it. And it's somebody should probably write a doctoral thesis about that, because you get into a barn, right? And sometimes they require you to use their vet or their farrier, or you feel like the peer pressure to use the barn's and you kind of get swept along with that sometimes. And even if you as an individual like want to have a masseuse in or something for your horse, like you feel awkward, like
Mhm.
maybe, it's like being back in high school.
Well,
So there's
yeah.
definitely some of that too, where, I want to do this for my horse, but I feel like I'm going to get, blowback from my peers, and it's going to make my barn experience uncomfortable. So I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, it's funny because I wouldn't say that, I haven't had that, and maybe like you said, I just kind of like
You have a
got
great
the
barn.
right barns. Yeah, but I have had on the modality side, right? So I've had an interesting pressure of like, oh, you're doing acupuncture. Why aren't you using so and so? She's so great, or he's so great, or have you tried this modality because that's so much better? And I'm kind of like, well, I'm happy with this one, And for instance, like I mentioned, for whatever reason, my mare does not like chiropractic. She just doesn't, right? And that's it. I'm not going to do it, right? So, but I can't tell you how many times even still, oh, you should get chiropractic, and it's like, she's trying to kill 4 people with the chiropractic. We're not going to do that. But she's fine with massage, with acupuncture. She's had Masterson, fine with that, right? With not you, sorry, but a different practitioner. But that's what I mean. It's like I had that kind of weird pressure, which is probably more unusual, but I think it may exist.
Well, it's interesting because like if you have a great experience, like either with your animal or with yourself, with
Yeah,
a practitioner who's helped, even if maybe not solve the problem, but help, like you're further along than you were, like you do want to recommend that person, because there's a tendency for us to think, well, it worked for me, it's going to work for you, or
right,
it worked for my horse, it'll work for your horse, which may or may not be true. And the person may be a great practitioner, but like you said, if it's not a modality that resonates with you or with your animal in your case, then that's valid feedback. So like, good for you for listening to your horse and being like, okay, this is a repeated no with repeated people. It's not the same person. And she, whatever the reason is, she doesn't want this. So let's try something else. Um so yeah, I mean, it's it's rare when I work on a horse, and I don't recommend also another form of body work, because there's usually something that comes up in my head, like the horse is, again, it's like, sorry, Jillian, again, woo woo. Like you just feel it. Like I'll feel it sometimes in my body. Like what would feel good to my body, and it's clearly not me. It's the horse like showing something to me. And so I'll tell the owner, like, I consider, acupuncture, or like
right.
sometimes chiropractic. I mean, something else that would complement what I'm finding in the body. Um, so yeah, I mean, there are a lot of options out there now. Um, because there's not like a strict licensure, and honestly, it's like, I don't know how. It's nice to see that, so, there are some licensures now, at a state level, but I don't want to say don't trust them, but like there's some states who, like, they only have licensure in like, let's say, chiropractic and massage, but their law states that, like, if you're an equine body worker, you have to be licensed. So it's like, wait a second, I have to take a test that you're giving, and there's no practical, it's all written. So you're not seeing me work on the animal. You're not qualified to assess me in that way anyway. I'm just
Right.
basically paying you a fee, and you're asking me to take a test in a modality that I'm not qualified in, so I can do any body work in your state. So every state is very different, and some of them are very weird. So if you're looking for a body worker for your horse, I mean, what you said, I think, is probably the best way to go, actually, is word of mouth.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
What?
then talk to the person. I mean, I do the same thing. Like when I moved here, like, you lose your whole structure, right? So I got to get, vets and dentists. And of course, I'm spending more time doing this for my animals than for myself. But I looked at some websites, I called some people, and just like, how do you talk about yourself? How do you talk about what you do? what is your training, and just kind of see how it feels. I mean, most of us, even if we say we're not intuitive, you get feelings about people, and even if the words they're saying make sense and it's the right answer, if you just feel weird about it, then that's probably not a good match.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think the other thing too, if I might add a suggestion that worked for me is, there's like, oh yeah, you should go check out Samantha. And so I'll look and see when Samantha's going to be at the barn next time for appointments, and then I'll make it a point to have my ride time somewhere around that time, and so I can watch what you're doing, right? So, and I usually am like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this. Do you mind if I just watch while you're working on, and to your point, you get that, I mean, you can call it intuitive or we can call it a gut check, but you get that gut check of, hey, that's going to work. That might work for me and my horse, or, maybe there's chemistry that's a little off that, between me and that person, right? If you have the opportunity to do that, but that's worked for me. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I can't speak for other body workers, but I'm always happy as long as the owner is okay with it, having other people watch, and the horse too. So that's the other thing. Sometimes if somebody has like a really big energy and it affects the horse's experience, then it's like, okay, you can watch, but like watch from over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like I said earlier, it's not bodywork doesn't exist on an island, and it's not a magic wand, and it's not going to solve all the problems. So I would caution against using anybody who claims that it does.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true, right? In real life, right? There's no magic wand, right?
There's
and it's
not.
yeah.
There's not. Absolutely not. And yeah, and again, that's, I don't know. It's like in my perfect world, everybody's working together for the good of the horse, and we all have that same goal, and nobody's ego is going to get in the way, but that's my ideal world.
Well, yeah, and then there's real life, and there's on that spectrum, but yeah, so so Samantha, I want to thank you for your time. This has been extremely informative, and I think for everybody else too, who maybe you've heard of Masterson Method or not, or just body work. Question that I always ask my guests at the end is, what was your aha moment, in working with horses that you would want to share with the audience?
Like with body work or in general?
With horses, or just in general, or it could be non-horse related. It's up to you.
Aha. I mean, what pops into my mind is when I first started working with Masterson Method, I tinkered with horse, like any horse I could get my hand on, for about a year before I started the certification. And there was one particular off the track thoroughbred who I practiced on a lot at the beginning. And there's a technique called bladder meridian, and it's what Jim calls search, response, stay, release. There are tons of videos out there if somebody wants to look it up. But in doing bladder meridian on him, there were a couple points on his body where he would literally collapse. I mean, he didn't actually collapse because I took my hand off before he fell over, but like his stay apparatus just completely failed him, and he was crumpling, like those plastic toys from back in the day where like you push the bottom and the legs kind of crumple. It was like that. And I can't tell you how terrifying it is to have, like 1,200 pounds of horse, like you're kneeling down working, along the hock, maybe start to come down, and like you feel it's going to happen before you actually see it, and just like roll away quickly. And then the second your hand comes off his body, it's like he's coming out of a trance. He's just, where am I? Like, so for me, like that was sort of like, okay, I'm definitely helping the horse because he's super relaxed. His head's down. He's like literally drooling, you know, he's like, ugh. And then there's a point here where he gets too relaxed and his head, like his nose drops to the ground. And then about 20 seconds later, his body just gives out. And at the time, like I had no context for this. Like I didn't know if this was usual or if it was me or if it was him. But what I did know was that I was having an effect on the horse that was very profound. And when I broke that connection, like you could see it, like he would just pop right out of this. Um, so for me, like my scientific mind was like, huh, cause effect, cause effect. Let's see if we can do this again. But wait, we don't want the horse to fall over. Talking about it now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this was so clear. Like his body was just like, he was releasing all of his tension at once, just like, bleh, like I cannot stand up. So that really got me hooked on this. I mean,
Wow.
just that, like, I am having this effect on the horse. It's good, but ... Okay, I need to look into this more. What's going on here? And then, holy cow. And he was a horse that I was riding too. So
Mm.
I could see the change under saddle. It was like this perfect encapsulation of not just my horse journey where, you know, we all do our best, right? Like, you know, we learn things, we like go to clinics, we read books, oh wow, like there's stuff that didn't exist, like this natural horsemanship idea. What's that? You know, like 40 years ago, you know, people weren't talking about that. At least not publicly. But you see all these little things combined and then you find another aspect of it and you're just like, there's more. Like I am having this effect on the horse. And so yeah, I think I would have to say that because it was really a crossroads for me about I mean, I stopped doing what I was doing. I changed the course of my business to I'm going to do body work because this is undeniable. It's helping the horse. There's an immediate cause and effect that I can see. And yeah, here we are 8 years later.
Wow. That was the very beginning of the journey, huh? That's really,
Yeah, but again, it also points to, and I know we're winding up here, but it also points to like anybody can do this. Like you really can. Like I tell my students, yes, there are techniques that we learn. Like you put your hands here and you put your body here, and here's the safety aspect of this. And but you know, as a learning adults, like those are fairly easy to grasp. Like what really makes you effective with Masterson, specifically in this context, is learning how to read the horse, like listen to the horse. And again, there are a lot of things that fall under that category, but being able to ask succinct questions and to read the answers quickly. You see someone like Jim Masterson himself working on a horse and it flows and the horse is like this the whole time. And, you know, it's like he's doing the same thing that a beginner's doing, just quicker, right?
right.
He's asking and answering the questions like this, where the rest of us are like,
And
you know,
that's a finesse and, you know, no pun intended, but kind of a mastery thing, right? The 10,000 hours, you know, versus the one.
exactly.
Yeah.
Learning how to, you know, some kid learning how to play the piano and you're just like, oh my gosh, you're playing that again, playing. A concert pianist, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you do it over and over and over again. So, but the point I'm making is it's not really about the techniques. I mean, yes, you have the techniques to help the horse, but with this particular modality and with craniosacral too, but in a different way, it's listening to the horse's body. And we can all do it. Like, even if you don't think you're intuitive, you can do it. So anyway, yeah, cool stuff.
Yeah.
I could talk about this for another 2 hours. Like, seriously.
Well, and I could too, because this is very, very fascinating to me. And I will confess, I bought the Masterson book. I read about the meridian technique, and you know, I'll tell you after the show, but it was kind of a comical experience with my mare. But we could talk for another 2 hours about that. But anyways,
Well,
Samantha,
mirrors are always comical. So.
oh, she's a pistol. Yeah. So,
their opinions. So.
Yeah. She had a very definite opinion, which was called whacking me across the face with her tail opinion. So, but anyway, Samantha, thank you very much. For those of you who are watching, Samantha has a website, the 11th Essential. .com, and you can also find her on Masterson Method site if you search for practitioners. We'll also be putting information on how to reach Samantha in the show notes as well. So this has been Under the Forelock. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Samantha, so much.
Very welcome.
Yeah, and let's all have a good evening. Thank you.